So we've tried to find a particular niche for ourselves where we know others are also active, but we think we can make a contribution. And that niche is working with leadership groups in countries who are designing climate-compatible development strategies. That means we're not about to spend a lot of money on building climate stations, for example, although we recognize that meteorological information is an absolutely central part at a relatively disaggregated level of any serious planning. And nor do we want to find ourselves funding large amounts of work which is very specific to particular localities. The niche we think that needs to be filled is, broadly speaking, this: to think about what your development trajectory would be like from now until, say, 2030 without climate change, and then to factor in climate change both as a threat and as an opportunity, and start to think what your development trajectory will be like with climate change. If those of you who've read the blog I did on the ODI site just before I went on holiday will know that I feel very uncomfortable with the terms mitigation and adaptation as the framework within which we think about climate, because there are many other adjustments in physical input-output relationships and prices that will shape how countries need to respond to climate change. The example that I use when I'm talking to my mother about this, so to speak, is lithium in Bolivia. Suddenly we need longer lasting and better batteries. Bolivia has a big resource of lithium buried under the salt flats in the Altiplano, and that is a huge opportunity. You know, lithium is the new oil. That's certainly not mitigation as we currently understand it for Bolivia, and it's not quite adaptation, which is mostly about, you know, how do you deal with floods and other weather changes. So climate compatible development is something more than simply mitigation and adaptation. And what we know about climate compatible development is that A, it's very difficult to work through analytically. B, it's very difficult to deliver through implementation. But C, and perhaps most important for us, it's very difficult to manage politically. Because although we all talk with rose-tinted spectacles about the value of national consensus, the national project, pulling all parties together behind long-term incentives, long-term pricing structures for the private sector, long-term subsidies to new technologies and so on, what we know is that every single decision that is made about climate and development is highly contested, as between generations, as between geographies, as between sectors, and so on. And we see that every day in the UK. You know, do we fund public transport or private transport? Do we provide higher prices for electricity in order to discourage use, and then in the same time somehow or other encourage energy poverty? So we want to explore a little bit the potential myth that it is easy to get to a national consensus on climate change and work with people as they work through the contradictions, trade-offs, opportunities that go with it. So that's how we define climate compatible development. It means reducing poverty, securing human development. The development focus is central, but in a way which reduces the extent of climate change and also helps societies to adapt to inevitable change. A key technique we think will be useful in working with stakeholder groups in countries is scenario planning. And this is an example from work that Steph Robenheimer led in South Africa, thinking about how to manage alternative energy futures for South Africa. Growth without constraints would give you that level of emissions. You could look at current development plans, you can look at various options, and then you look at what's required by science, and it is a much bigger cut than is so far foreseen. And these kinds of emissions calculations are based on sophisticated modeling, general equilibrium type modeling over a number of years. You need to have policy making informed by good analysis, which is operating in the right strategic space in order to inform what decision makers are going to do.